How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer. I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final scene of the high. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final scene of the
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. You might notice that it's not Saturday, but that doesn't mean we aren't doing socialism. And we have a special edition live socialism stream tonight because Haymarket Books, our favorite socialist book publisher, is streaming a live presentation about parenting for the revolution. That's what abolition means. Abolition is generally a reference to prison abolition, so they're probably talking about that. But abolition generally is also a reference to the overthrowing of the capitalist system, which is what prison abolition is really all about, because they believe that the prison industrial complex, the police uphold the capitalist state as the managers of private property and all that good stuff. We are watching this presentation live tonight. I think they're just playing music right now. They're playing some annoying intro music. The stream is live though, so that's good. Now, I want to set some ground rules because I have pinned the link to the top of the chat over on YouTube. So you guys can go over in their chat. It is a live chat. However, this is just an intro video. We don't need to worry about it. However, I want everyone to represent me well. I don't want any bullshit questions about socialism and communism or better than that. I want smart, thoughtful questions. I will tell you what questions I want asked if you guys want to go over there and ask them. I want us to show off a little bit. I want us to show off how much we know about their philosophy. I don't want to see any, don't you guys just want to kill all your babies? I don't want to see that shit. I don't want to see any, don't you know real communism has never been tried? I don't want to see that shit. I don't want any, why are you allowed to engage in capitalism if you're, I don't want to see that shit. We know the answers to all those questions. That makes us look stupid. It makes us look like we don't know what we're talking about. So if we're going over there, we're going to be nice. We're going to be polite. We're not going to be arguing. We're not going to be debating. We're not going to be disruptive. We're going to be on our best behavior because this is all on video and I don't want you guys acting like a bunch of unhinged hooligans. I disavow all of that. And we're going to be asking smart, thoughtful questions about their work. Okay? That's the point of this. And sometimes when we do that and we behave ourselves and we ask smart, thoughtful questions, when it's a live presentation, which it may not be, this might actually be pre-recorded, I don't know. But when we do that, they sometimes answer us. And that's cool. All right? Thank you, Jay Coney, for the $10 super sticker. I appreciate it. No, Trendolin. No. And guys, if people disobey my wishes, I know Trendolin's just trolling, but if people disobey my wishes, you might not find yourself in my chat for much longer because you are representing me over there. I have to account for all of this. It all comes back on me eventually. So no stupid questions. If you have a question about whether or not your question is good, look, they're holding the next socialism conference on the 4th of July. Did you guys see that? The next socialism conference isn't in September on Labor Day. It's on the 4th of July. That is a giant middle finger right there. Maybe I'll try to go undercover at it. Who knows? But seriously, they're holding their fucking big annual conference on the 4th of July. No, you're not. No. Guys, I'm fucking serious. If you go over there and you disrespect my wishes, I will ban you in my chat. So, no fucking around. Because this all blows back on me, okay? Yeah, you want to go? We can talk about that, Trendolin. All right, let me turn up their volume. They're still doing their intro.
Window. And we'll get to those later in the program. Thanks for joining us today. Our event will begin shortly.
Good. Yeah, we don't do this shit here, Vicky. You're either here to learn or you're gonna go. No, none of this. Vicky is probably not smart enough to know we're not actually communists. So Vicky thinks she's owning the libs right now. Vicky doesn't know what she's walked into. We don't do this shit here. No shit posting in my chat.
Welcome everyone to the virtual launch of We Grow the World Together, Parenting Toward Abolition, edited by Maya Shenwar and Kim Wilson. I'm Katie O'Donnell. I'm an editor at Haymarket, and I was lucky enough to work with Maya and Kim on this wonderful book. It's a book so many of us have been waiting for, parents, caregivers, and anyone who loves and works with children, grown
Vicky
and
just got
small.
herself banned. Goodbye, Vicky.
When we center children, what world would we build? That question of world building is also the project of abolition. And as we know, the work of creating liberatory futures isn't just a thought experiment. It's not a metaphor. We Grow the World Together reminds us that it begins with the quiet and daily work of giving and receiving care. So I read a draft of this book while I was pregnant and before I had shared the news with anyone
you mean
at
they
work.
Have kids?
And I would read bits and pieces aloud to my
God.
partner as we thought about how our lives might look in a year's time. I remember talking to him
Who
about
could have
Kim's
predicted
reminder that the labor of parenting and caregiving is a collective endeavor and a political project, and that we need to be clear-eyed about the material conditions under which we all live, labor, and love.
Yes, that's a good
And I
question.
remember too Maya's description of parenting, like abolition, as a process. We've got to struggle, try, fail, and learn, she writes. Creativity is key. Mistakes are inevitable. We dream, we plan, we ditch our plans, we dream and do again. There's even more wisdom from the incredible contributors in this collection, many of whom you know as brilliant scholars and organizers, and who are writing in a different mode as caregivers and as learners in these pages. The book is a gift and a balm, and I know tonight's conversation will be as well. So I will start by introducing our wonderful co-editors. First up, Maya Shenwar is the director of the Truth Out Center for Grassroots Journalism and board president at Truth Out. She is the co-author of Prison by Any Other Name and the author of Lockdown, Locked Out. Maya is a co-founder of the Chicago Community Bond Fund and organizes with the Love and Protect Collective. Kim Wilson is an artist, educator, writer, and organizer. She is the co-founder, co-host, and producer of Beyond Prisons, a podcast on incarceration and prison abolition. A social scientist by training, Dr. Wilson has a PhD in urban affairs and public policy, and her work focuses on examining the interconnected functioning of systems, including poverty, racism, ableism, and heteropatriarchy within a carceral structure. Maya and Kim will be in conversation tonight with Harsha Walia, who is the award-winning author of Border and Rule and Undoing Border Imperialism. Trained in the law, she is a community organizer and campaigner in migrant justice, anti-capitalist, feminist, and anti-imperialist movements, including No One is Illegal and Women's Memorial March Committee.
Migrant justice, I wonder what's going to happen with that.
They will also be in conversation with Dorothy Roberts,
that kind of sounds like immigration
who's an acclaimed
to me.
scholar of race, gender, and the law. She joined the University of Pennsylvania as its 14th Penn Integrates Knowledge Professor with joint appointments in the departments of Africana Studies and Sociology, as well as in the law school. Her groundbreaking books include Torn Apart, Fatal Invention, Shattered Bonds, and Killing the Black Body. And with that, I will turn it over to Kim and Maya.
Okay, cool, Bob.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you so much for editing our book. It would not be here without you. And I'm going to hold up my copy so we can prove to everyone that it indeed exists. Welcome, everyone. I'm Maya. As Katie said, I'm in Chicago on the unceded lands of the Council of the Three Fires,
land blessing,
the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, along with dozens of others. And these lands were colonized through acts of genocide, forced removal, and dispossession, and also through the systematic kidnapping of children, which is something that relates really deeply to what we're discussing today. Well, let's just wait and see
what they talk about.
I want to extend a lot of gratitude tonight to our sponsoring
We want the questions to be relevant to what they're saying, guys. If it's not relevant, we shouldn't be asking it.
Which published We Grow the World Together and many other excellent titles. Truth Out, the social justice news organization that has been my home of 17 years. The Beyond Prisons podcast, which everyone should listen to, and Kim is a co-host of that podcast. And also Upend Movement, which is doing essential work to abolish the family policing system.
Oh, I thought it said
I want to recognize also tonight that today is Trans Day of Remembrance, when we mourn our trans siblings who we've lost to violence. and also recommit ourselves to fight
extra
for the
virtue
living.
points.
And when we talk about
Go clear their
incarceration,
chat.
and when we talk
Go
about
put
abolition,
a rainbow
like
in their
we're
chat or
doing
something.
today, we have to recognize that 1 in 6 trans people have been incarcerated at some point, including almost half of Black trans people
1 in
in
6
the
trans
US.
people are in jail.
And when we talk about
Wow.
parenting too, I think we have to recognize that we're in a moment when trans youth are particularly under threat, and that parenting toward abolition includes loving and fighting for trans and non-binary children and adults.
Of course it does.
So I just want to bring that into the virtual room. So thank you for joining us today in the middle of the week. I know everyone is carrying a lot right now. When we started this call, before you all joined us, we were like, what do we say? We can't say, how are you? We can't say, like, hope you're doing well. Everybody's carrying a lot. And we started working on this book about 4.5 years ago. And we did not know that we would be
4.5
launching
years
it
to write a book.
as the US is
God.
on the precipice of plunging further into fascism and also in the midst of Israel's escalated genocide against Palestinians.
Oh, we gotta look this bitch
So
up.
this
She's
is a
a real
terrifying
socialist.
time on
She's
many
real.
fronts,
She's real
and
queer.
an intensifying time for social movements. And care is an essential component of movement work, especially in disastrous times. And so we hope that people use our book as a tool. Sometimes caregiving is seen as something that takes us away from movements. And even tonight, I'm sitting here feeling nervous that my kid is going to come crashing into the room and distract us from what we're doing here. Distract us. And this did actually happen Monday night at the Chicago launch. But one of the things that our book explores is the idea that caregiving, including caring for children, actually drives movements, and that care is central to sustaining movement work. So the seeds of this book started germinating during the 2020 uprisings while my kid was a toddler. And I was feeling frustrated and guilty, really, about not going to all the protests. And I spoke to a friend about all this who had older kids. And I was like, I feel like I'm not doing the work.
No, they are not okay with homonormative either.
Because
they don't like that.
I'm doing all this caregiving. And she said,
homonormative is actually considered to be worse than heteronormative,
too.
honestly.
Care is also the work. And Kim will be discussing this more. And of course, just because somebody's a parent or a caregiver, it doesn't mean they're automatically doing the work of liberation. You know, look at these so-called parents' rights groups and the trad wives on Instagram, and there's a million examples. So we don't want to idealize that.
Conservatives do not do the work.
But caregiving and caregivers do need to be recognized as a core part of liberation movement.
That means they think you've assimilated
to straightness.
And
they're so often minimized or forgotten when the credit is given. So I started thinking about this in a different way. I thought about how when my sister was incarcerated on and off over the course of 13 years, I was busy writing about prison, organizing against prison, but the deepest work that I felt I was doing against prisons was visiting my sister inside, writing her letters, talking to her on the phone, maintaining those connections that the prison industrial complex does its best to demolish. And at that moment, in 2020, I wondered how other people were wrestling with this question of the relationship between caregiving and organizing. And I approached my friend, Kim Wilson, who is an incredible abolitionist organizer and media maker and parent, to see if she wanted to co-edit a book about it with me. And I wrote her this very long, rambling email about it. And within like 10 minutes, she replied, yes, one word. And I feel very lucky in this, because if there is such thing as abolitionist parenting, which is something our contributors disagree about a little bit, Kim is doing it. And Kim and I knew that the book had to be an anthology. From the beginning, we talked about collectivity as a theme of the book. Abolition is a collective project. And in the world that we want, parenting is a collective project too. But also, it had to be an anthology instead of just a fully written by the author's book, because, and I say this with love to myself, I'm not an expert on parenting. And I'm not sure anyone's an expert on parenting, even though so many of us are constantly grasping for the magical advice that's going to make the path forward clear to us on this difficult subject. And I think that parenting is similar to the project of abolition in this way. As Mariame Kaba says, we need a million experiments. There isn't one blueprint for abolition. There isn't one blueprint for parenting or caregiving. There are a million different contexts and communities. Every kid is different, and we're all just experimenting our way along. So for our book, we needed a bunch of perspectives, a range of experiences, kind of a patchwork tapestry. So we reached out to a bunch of abolitionists, some of whom identified as parents or caregivers, others who were youth mentors, others were building queer chosen family and collective caregiving
Queer chosen
projects.
family?
And
what does
others
queer
were
chosen
dedicated
family
to
mean?
documenting parent-led
That's a question.
movements.
Guys, what does queer chosen family mean? Someone make sure to ask that question, please.
And we did end up with that patchwork tapestry that
explicitly
I think
like that.
helps
What
us
does queer
understand
chosen family mean?
how caregiving and abolition intertwine. So in my intro to the book, I write that working on a book forces you to practice believing that the future will exist. And I think that caring for children carries that mandate.
If they don't answer it, we'll ask
that
again
you
later.
have to practice believing in a future, even if you're not entirely convinced. And this is also true of abolitionist organizing. And when we received the essays, one thing I was struck by is how every one of them contained kernels of possibility. This sense that we can not only envision and believe in a world without cages, but we can also build it in a practical sense.
Like
just as we are doing the practical,
that's okay, everyone was polite,
often unseen labor of building
like,
every single day in caregiving our children and our chosen families,
like that crazy bitch at it
and
again.
our communities too. So I will leave it there and pass it to Kim.
Thanks, Maya, for that incredible introduction. And I'll try to do justice to my part. And before I get started, I'm Kim Wilson. I use she, her pronouns. And I am coming to you from Los Angeles. So when we were talking about, how we were going to, run the program this evening, Maya and I had these discussions around, she'll do the intro and I'll talk about, the structure of the book and some of the things. So my task here tonight, I feel, is pretty simple. It's to talk about the through lines that run throughout the book and some of the common themes that run throughout the book. But before I do that, I want to share that, the book functions as a set of invitations and as a set of offerings to folks. So we're inviting folks to think about, the different experiments that are included in the book. And that's how we view all of the contributions that are included in the book. And there are 32 essays in the book total, if you include the introduction and the foreword. All of these essays combined offer us different access points that allow us to complicate our thinking about the intersections of parenting, care work, and abolition. They also emphasize the idea that this is doable, right? And I want to underscore that this work is doable. If we think about abolitionists and abolitionist parenting and caregiving, we think of them as action-oriented practices that require us to do certain things, right? So this is a doing
They'll do questions
practice.
at the end, guys.
We're learning new skills, unlearning a lot of things along the way as well. We're trying things, and we're also trying not to worry too much about the outcome, right? So that fear of failure that's rooted in white supremacy, right? That perfectionism that says, oh, it has to look a certain way. That's one of the common threads.
That's not what that means, but we're asking them.
All of the essays, and we're pushing back against
Socialists
those ideas.
hate this less than James does.
So if we, move a little bit,
and isn't that funny?
Ahead and think
Socialists
about
can answer our questions.
Something that Maya said.
Why can't James Lindsay answer our questions?
We're parenting and caregiving as the building blocks of movement work, right? So this isn't something that we do separate from movement work. This is essential to movement work. It's what allows us to do all of the other things, right? So if you're engaging in jail support or court support for comrades that have been arrested, that's a form of care work, right? We may not think of it in those terms, but that's in essence what that is. If we're, the person who's setting up the Google Docs for the meeting and taking notes, that's care work, right? And that work is often, invisibilized, minimalized, or minimized. It's largely obscured, it's usually gendered, and most of the time it's unpaid, right? And these are things that come out in many of the essays, even if the authors aren't specifically writing about those things. If it's not thematized in the essays, it's one of the themes that comes up. Additionally, I think that another theme is one of humility. And Dylan Rodriguez and I had a conversation about this about a month ago. And, as he put it, it's not just about being humble, or practicing humility, but also that having children, they will humiliate you as well. And we need to understand that. And that's something that I think a lot of the writers, the contributors to the volume really do take a kind of, they have a sense of humor about, what their parenting practice is. And they're sharing with us these really intimate kind of glimpses into their lives and inviting us to think more deeply about parenting. Another theme that I identify in the book is that, we're thinking about collectively, as Maya pointed out earlier, that this is collective work, but we're thinking about our children as opposed to these are my kids, right? They're our children. And that sense, of whether we're thinking about safety and other issues, that extends to everybody's kids, not just our own children, that we're thinking collectively and very broadly and internationally, I will add. Another theme that I identified is that this work starts at home, right? that we don't have to, I think oftentimes we think we have to start a nonprofit, right? No one in the book is suggesting you go out and start a nonprofit. We're saying you can start at home, you can practice at home in really small ways, that every single one of these, offerings is an example of what abolition looks like in practice. So when people say, what does that world look like? You can just hold up the book and say, here it is. We wrote about it. There's 32 essays here that each one basically gives you examples of what abolition looks like on the ground, what it looks like in your home, what it can look like in your community. And then we can, expand that and think more broadly into what that might look like, in society and beyond, right? The theme of experimentation is one that I think is central to the book. If all of the essays don't have a kind of thread of experimentation, right? Even if that language isn't used, I think that it's an important thread that runs throughout all of the contributions. Another one, and this is something that I continue to think about, really deeply, is that failure, the idea of failure has a revolutionary potential, right? Or the revolutionary potential of failure is an important theme that runs throughout the book. All of the authors are talking about things that didn't work, right? In one way or another, and what they tried instead, or what they're proposing instead. If they identified a need or something that failed in the community, that there's potential in coming together, in thinking about, well, how do we respond to this thing? How do we fill the gap?
They're talking about how do we collectivize
so that we're getting our needs met, and everyone
gets that right.
Is
how do we take parenting from being in the nuclear family?
Additionally, and I could go on, I have a very long list here. I won't go through the entire thing because otherwise I'm going to take up all of the time, but tap me for that later. The final one that I'll introduce here is thinking about the contradictions, right? And inviting those contradictions, because the work that we do oftentimes as abolitionists is contradictory, and understanding that, this is a both and. Most of the time that we're having to think in both and terms about a lot of things, and not just, oh, well, it's got to be either this way or that way. We're refraining from that, and, and really giving you a range of different examples that speak to that. I lied. I said that was the last one. I think that the other theme that comes up is, something that Dylan Rodriguez talks about is, that we're with you, whoever you is. We're talking about our children, young people. If you're an educator and you have charge over, students or what have you, whatever the context is that you're working, not just necessarily in a very narrow kind of parenting role, but we're thinking very broadly here about parenting and caregiving, that, we're with you against them, right? And that's the theme that runs, I feel, throughout much of the book as well, that we want our kids to know we have your back, right? We have your back. And that these hostile forces are, they may be coming for you, but we're with you. We're with you. And I think that that's where I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to turn it over to Maya to ask the first question.
Oh, good. Discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I think that's such a good place to leave it. I love the way Dylan put it, and I think it had a bit more profanity.
I think they're going to be going for a minute.
But just that sense of we're with you against, those forces is this thing that can definitely broaden out beyond parenting particular children. And I think, it's definitely something I'm keeping in mind. So, Dorothy, we are so grateful to you for your essay. And I think it was such a needed contribution to the book. So the essay is called The Legacy of Black Mothers' Radical Resistance of Care. And in particular, you're writing about the family policing system, and you put it in this really succinct way that this system promises to make families stronger by tearing them apart. And this contradiction is so glaring, so violent. And the power of this essay for me is that you're writing about how mothers and caregivers are rising up against that system, just creatively and brilliantly and
Holy
transformatively.
shit.
So I would love for you to share with people a bit about what you wrote in your essay, including that legacy of resistance.
As an educator, I know that
Sure.
our
Well,
kids
thank you
are
so
my
much.
kids. It's a liberating experience.
Happy to be part of your book
Yo.
as well as part of this session this evening. I love the idea of the book, and as you said, I've been working very intensively toward abolishing the family policing system and working with Black mothers whose children have been taken from them, who are really at the forefront of a movement to end family policing and create a world that really cares for children and keeps them safe. And so I wanted to focus on that in this essay and connect family separation and the devaluation of Black mothers' bonds with their children under the slavery regime to today's family policing system, and also connecting Black mothers' history of resistance through caring for their own children and for the entire community's children to organizing to abolish family policing today. So I do start out with pointing out, as you mentioned, this deep contradiction in the family policing system of tearing families apart, supposedly to protect children and keep them safe and improve their welfare. And I focus on a couple ways that that can be traced back to the regime of slavery, because part of the excuse white enslavers constructed for the horrors of family separation was the myth that Black people lacked the capacity to feel any emotional pain or to care deeply for their children. And that same idea is what I see in the disregard by caseworkers and judges and researchers for the unbearable pain that child removal inflicts on Black parents and children today. This system relies on that kind of tearing children up, tearing families apart, but also on that idea that Black people don't feel the pain
The capitalist
of
system is the
losing their
problem.
children. That's why it's so
Homeschooling
easy
should
to
never
take their
be
children
lost
from
as our
them.
main.
And the deep contradiction of that is that's the very reason why the state steals children from Black communities, because
Is this person for
that's
real?
because it hurts so deeply. So
sorry, this lady isn't saying anything. This educator in the chat just said the capitalist system is the problem. Homeschooling should never be lost as our main target in the fight against the nuclear family. The chosen family is vital.
Black children aren't really harmed by taking them away from their parents. The other is the way that weaponizing children is used to force compliance. Enslavers use children as hostages to prevent mostly Black mothers from running away and trying to fetter them to the plantation. Harriet Jacobs uses those exact words in her autobiography, in her memoir, that her enslaver used her children as a way of keeping her on the plantation. And today, that's what child protection agencies do as well. They weaponize children to force compliance with ridiculous tasks that have nothing to do with supporting families. And Black mothers are often penalized.
Can someone at this person in the chat? Don't ignore the presentation. At this person in the chat, and can you say, why is homeschooling our main target in the fight against the nuclear family? Can someone just ask that question to that person in the chat? Yes. Yeah. Well, no. Well, no. That's not. No. Not that question. The question I just asked, Bot. Why is homeschooling the main target in the fight against the nuclear family?
Harriet Jacobs did endure relentless sexual abuse by her enslaver. She stayed there largely to protect her own children, but she did eventually escape. She fled and she spent 7 years hiding in a crawl space in her grandmother's house before escaping to Philadelphia. And then she bought her children's freedom. And I think, like Harriet Jacobs, Black mothers have historically, from the time of the slavery regime till, through the end of Reconstruction, through the centuries that the U.S. state did not care at all about their children. They have had to find other ways that aren't tied to the state to protect their children and the whole community's children, and to resist the destruction of their families by caring for their children in radical ways. So turning state violence against them into a motivation to dismantle the family policing system and to build caring ways to support families and keep children safe. And I highlight a particular organizer, Joyce McMillan, whose fight to recover her children from the New York City's Administration for Children's Services was the catalyst for her radical organizing. And this is
Can
true
someone ask the question
for
again?
most
What does
of
it
the
mean to
leaders
queer the
in
nuclear
this
family?
movement. They were inspired by their care for their children to work in a movement to abolish this horrific system. And I give examples of the kind of work that Ms. McMillan and others are doing, not only to weaken the family policing system, dismantle it piece by piece, but also to build ways within Black communities, community-based ways to provide support to families that are completely disconnected from so-called child welfare agencies. So I think that the work of Black mothers' resistance through care reminds us that abolition embodies a radical resistance of care. And we can imagine a society that doesn't rely on family separation and on caging people, because there is this long legacy of Black women who cared for the children that were discarded by the state. Their legacy of building child caring institutions, which I write about in the essay, within Black communities, untethered to white supremacist institutions and systems, I think gives us assurance that we can raise children safely without family policing, something that so many people are worried about. They're afraid that we're abandoning children. No, we have a legacy of proving that we can take better care of children than what this system does, which harms them. So Black mothers have resisted by radically caring for children, and their radical resistance through care can inspire us to abolish carceral approaches to meeting children's needs, which cannot possibly work, to ending state violence against families, and to building a more caring world.
It's my turn, and I'm so off, right now. But thank you so much for that, Dorothy. Thank you for that beautiful
other people in the chat are asking,
and for your contribution to the book. It's such an honor to have you write an original essay for our book. That was
white supremacist system like capitalism.
Yes. Thanks, Kim. It was an honor and a pleasure, and I'm so happy to be part of this project.
Thank you. Thank you. Harsha, I'm going to ask you to, talk a little bit about your essay. And the title of your essay is The Work of Making Life, 4 Vignettes on Abolitionist Caregiving in Practice. And before I ask you to talk about your essay, you include
I'm a little annoyed they have so many people watching and we have so few people watching.
And I'd like you to share that quote, because I think that when we're talking about abolition, that there all kinds of different definitions that are floating around, or different kinds of ideas that folks have. So for us to have kind of like a shared kind of understanding or meaning of what you're talking about, about abolition, I'd love for you to talk about that and then talk about your essay.
Kim, do you want to read it out? I don't have it handy.
Okay. I
go for it.
I do have it handy. So you write, you're quoting Andrea Ritchie and Mariam Kaba here, and they write, rooted in the Black radical tradition and the lived experiences of criminalized people and communities, prison industrial complex, PIC, abolition, is a structural analysis of oppression, a political vision of a restructured society, a theory of social life, or how we relate to one another, and a practical organizing strategy.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for offering that and bringing that into the room. And also such immense gratitude and thanks to you, Kim, to Maya, Dorothy, Haymarket for this conversation and for this beautiful project. Such a tremendous honor to be part of this book and this conversation. I'm on unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish lands.
Second
and
land
as Maya,
blessing.
You reminded us, settler colonialism on these lands is not just a historic project, it's ongoing. And one of the key
tell me you don't
features
know
of
anything
settler
about the left
colonialism
without telling me. Stick
alongside
around. We'll teach you
was
some
to
stuff because you
deliberately
don't know
target
anything
Indigenous
yet.
and Black peoples for genocide and for family separation in the most violent of ways. And today I'm also thoughtful about the many ways in which the Palestinian people of all genders who are enduring genocide and also carrying their people with immense care. And as our screens are filled with daily horrors, unimaginable horrors, they're also filled with the most profoundly beautiful expressions of care towards Palestinian children. Whether we're watching a caress, someone doing a magic trick, someone cooking children's favorite foods, sharing candy, offering hugs, telling jokes, or a hair stroke. Every single one of those is an expression of Palestinian steadfastness in the face of genocide and occupation. And I also want to honor today as well, Trans Day of Remembrance. And as the so-called framework of children's rights is being weaponized by transmisogynist and right-wing forces, for me, abolitionist caregiving and abolitionist practices, period, deeply loves and stands alongside trans children, and we honor trans children as sacred. Writing for this book is probably the hardest thing I've ever written. And
just
not
trans
because
kids?
I'm not thinking about it, but because I feel like I'm obsessing about it all of the time. And as Kim and Maya, you pointed out, like so much of this book is so deeply intimate for all of those who contributed to it. So thinking alongside the quote that you grounded us in, or grounded, this question in from Mariam and Andrea.
Yes, you can.
I extend that to thinking about
do
abolitionist caregiving. Abolitionist caregiving as a political vision, as a mode of analysis, and a feminist homemaking as world-making strategy that calls on us to study, teach, and embody abolition as we guide and grow alongside future generations. Abolition refuses to invisibilize caretaking forms of labor, forged almost always through conditions of labor and sometimes love, and also sometimes, to name the messy, at odds with each other. Because I also want to affirm that not all caregivers need to love their work, especially for those for whom care work is squarely under conditions of exploitation and precarity, like immigrant domestic workers. And here, when I'm talking about caregiving or caretaking, I'm thinking expansively of ourselves, of the children and elders in our lives, of the communities and the earth that we belong to. These are collective revolutionary practices of labor and love and life, particularly the death-defying caregiving
I thought about
and deep
that,
love
Trendlin.
of Black,
I prefer
Indigenous,
not to.
Palestinian, Kashmiri, queer
It's
and
too
trans,
baity.
refugee migrant,
It's too
caste
much.
oppressed, low
They'll
income,
know.
domestic worker, land defender, incarcerated, criminalized, and single parent caregivers. We know that genocide, empire, racial capitalism, and transmisogyny are deathscapes by design. These violent ideologies and systems target certain caregivers through stigmatization, surveillance, punishment, family policing, and so much more, precisely because reproductive labor is a threat to these violent systems. In the face of this, abolitionist caregiving is an orientation towards relationality and a deliberate
We gotta look up this
confrontation to the
woman, too. She's
capitalist,
great.
colonial, and carceral order.
Very socialist.
James Baldwin told us, quote, "The children are always ours, every single one of them, all over the globe. And I am beginning to suspect that whoever is incapable of recognizing this may be incapable of morality, end quote. I think of abolitionist caregiving as a prefigurative space in which vision and practice merge every day, and a practical organizing strategy in my daily life. In the book, I lay out a series, but just to highlight a few. One, an emphasis on process, communication, and relationality, knowing deeply that connection with our children is generally more ethical and effective than punishment. Two, using frameworks of choices and consequences, shared expectations, mutual accountability, restoration, and abundance, instead of fear-based authoritarian discipline or a good cop, bad cop parenting paradigm. Three, building skills and pods of helpers to problem-solve conflict and to interrupt harm. Four, centering radical humility, including saying sorry, and I'm learning with you. Five, refusing to treat children as our appendages or property and upholding the consent and autonomy of children. This is, of course, hard. And part of it is admitting all of the times where we and I have said, just do it because I said so. And I'm not even saying that's bad, but it requires a constant unlearning. I share a vignette in the book about a learning process for me that I'll offer up here. Since A was a baby, we've been swimming at the local Eileen Daly Community Center and pool. When she was a toddler, I happened to come across the commemorative plaque and discover that Eileen Elizabeth Daly was a school teacher who advocated for banning corporal punishment in schools in the 1970s. Turns out, until 1973, corporal punishment in schools in the province of BC where I reside was legal, and teachers were legally authorized to cane, whip, strap, and use other forms of physical punishment as a disciplinary corrective in their classes. Schools are, of course, still no haven for children, but this plaque hits like a gut punch. Just days prior to reading it, I had resisted yelling at my then precious, precocious toddler, and admittedly only after my impatient threat of stop or else had elicited a look of fear on her face. The else was an empty threat on my part. I usually would, at most, withdraw our plans for whatever activity might have been planned for that week, a trip to the park or the pool or the library. But in that moment, I realized that my child may think that, regardless of our loving relationship, and because of the power differential and dependency inherent to caregiving a child, I could possibly punish them simply for expressing themselves. It occurs to me that while I and others spend endless hours talking about systems of power and control out there, and have an express commitment to not engaging harmful strategies of shame or punishment with my kid, I have no idea how she herself experienced or negotiated power as an often sole, toddler-aged child amidst many adults. After the seemingly mundane moment reflecting on the plaque of Eileen Daly and my own parenting, I start to integrate regular check-ins with my kid about power relationships and the punishment paradigm at home. This is a difficult mirror. Most organizers know that it is easier for us to articulate why the system sucks, but we have a harder time practicing how to be in good relations with one another. But as Mariam Kaba informs us, quote, we have to transform the relationships that we have with each other so we can really create new forms of safety and justice in our communities, end quote. Working collectively to nurture care and safety within liberation work is not easy. It challenges me to bring voice to those unnamed hurts and complicated edges that stem from the deepest cracks that traverse often contradictory layers of power, trauma, and marginalization. A few years later, my kid's exceptional kindergarten teacher teaches the class about these circles. She comes home and is excited to develop and design a set of sticks to use during conflict. We're each supposed to take turns with these sticks and answer a series of prompts about our feelings, our fears, our hurts, and our expectations. I confess that I'm a terrible abolitionist and I want to throw away the sticks. In fact, a few times I've hidden these sticks. A, on the other hand, effortlessly communicates and probes deep. Sometimes I'm convinced she's picking a fight just to watch me fumble and squirm over these sticks with my monosyllabic answers. Over time, I come to appreciate the methodology and the container the sticks provide. Perhaps I even get better at it as I start to offer fuller sentences. At 7 years old, A tests boundaries in a significant and potentially unsafe way. I walk in the door and see that look of fear flash across her face, an expression I haven't seen since that time that they were a toddler. This moment of anger and frustration could have been quickly escalated, but her face and this old image of this mundane plaque of Eileen Daly stops me in my tracks. The muscle memory from practicing with these ridiculous sticks then kicks in. Connecting instead of punishing, active listening and problem solving, understanding the context of behaviors, communicating about expectations and consequences, and focusing on the impacts of an action instead of demanding obedience to rules. Her face eases and my child melts into my arms. She says, "I'm sorry for what I did. It was actually really scary and I don't think I'll ever do it again. Thank you for talking with me about how to stay safe, and thank you for listening to me about what happened." Abolition transforms us as people as we realize our own capacities. And abolitionist parenting aims not only to change the very real and uneven material conditions and social conditions around us, it also changes us in the process. Abolitionist parenting is not a singular moment. We are made and unmade by each other constantly. And like any parent, I have had my share of missteps. Yet, like any proud parent, I can say my kid is infinitely better at this than I am and teaches me every day. Ruthie Gilmore reminds us abolition is presence, which means abolition is life in rehearsal, not a recitation of rules, much less relentless lament, end quote. Or as my kid reminds me, practice makes something else. Abolitionist parenting is, after all, life in rehearsal, life in practice, life in growth. And perhaps even more so, it is the work of making and growing life itself.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I have gone over and over that story ever since I read it, about your child bringing home the talking pieces and you being like, "Oh shit, like, I have to do the thing." And I've had the same experience, but just that process of working through it and actually practicing, I think, carries so many lessons. I wanted to share with everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat in YouTube. And then we will hopefully be getting to some eventually. And Kim, I would love for you to share about your essay, Survival Parenting, which I feel like is such an important grounding for us in the book. It's so easy with a parenting book to do this thing of, under ideal conditions, this is how you should parent, you know? And I think that's the failing of 95 to 99% of parenting books, is this idea that, you know, you're living inside the bubble with every resource and every endless time and endless money. And your essay takes that on squarely. So would love for you to share.
I can certainly do that, but I also saw that Harsha wanted to share a reading. So if you don't mind me upsetting the schedule a little bit.
Reading. No,
Harsha,
we will go all night with you guys.
Oh, I think that was from earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fuck you, Bot fucking says, "I was homeschooled for a while too. I had to do so much work on learning the internalized capitalism that was put into me."
Good, I got it. Thank you, Maya. Thanks, Harsha. Yeah, thank you for that. And, you know, as you said, you know, when I was writing my essay, there were a lot of different things that were going on at that time. I joked with you, but only slightly, that I was writing under duress. And I really feel, that I was in excruciation pain. I was dealing with a lot of chronic pain.
You are a testament to true liberation.
My spine surgery. And, it was really difficult to think about, or think straight and sit there and try to, buckle down and write something that was going to be coherent or that had something to say. And, I had that moment or many moments of comparing what I was writing. I had the benefit of reading everyone else's essays, and I'm like, how? Like, what do I have
We've
to
got to
say,
find more
right?
queer people to interact with. This is great.
And then I thought about it, right? And I said, well, I am parenting.
You know what? You know what we need to do? We need to start emailing like queer therapists and stuff and just pretending to be real patients and like staging these elaborate conversations. We should actually do this. That's a really good idea. We could document all of it, just publish all the crazy shit.
For anyone. And it's not an experience that I would wish on any parent. And so, you know, in my essay, I talk about how as parents we're, you know, sorted into these different categories. You're a good parent if you do this thing. You're a bad parent if you do these things, right? And that kind of sorting is not very useful.
We could do online queer therapy.
Of, you know, helping us think through bigger issues, right? The complexity of how these systems frustrate and often undermine our own parenting practices, right? And, you know,
yes.
I wanted to pay attention to the fact that, you know, I'm parenting on what often feels like the margins of society. I'm parenting in survival mode all of the time, that there's not a let up. There's no break when you have incarcerated children, that you're forever worried. You're perpetually in a state of fear and concern that every phone call is going to be a potential problem or that there's a potential crisis. And, you know, that is not a condition that I would wish on anyone. And yet it's something that has been repeated over and over and over again, tens and hundreds of thousands of times, millions of times across generations in this country. And, you know, for me, it's like, I guess it's the difficulty or being in that space where as an academic,
if you're new to socialism, you don't understand how hilarious
and,
this is.
You know,
but
examining public policy and thinking about, you know, how these systems impact and undermine communities, right? And then I'm living it, right? And then I'm living
Maria,
it as
are you
well.
Drinking?
And that experience is surreal. So I try to capture some of that in the essay and talk about, you know, how all of the things when we're talking about, you know, being in survival mode, right? Like we're talking about, it affects economics, you know, the economics and financial situation of a household when you have an incarcerated child or children. It affects your housing situation, healthcare, education. Not only does it affect that, but oftentimes those things are affected before the incarceration happens, right? So again, thinking in these kind of both and terms and trying to get us to complicate our thinking about what that means. So you're in this state of precarity all of the time. And if you happen to be fortunate enough or privileged enough to have access to resources,
this is too elaborate of a story,
people that are supporting you.
Say you were too young to know.
In material ways, right? Like financially.
Say you don't know how, you were too young to know how child services got involved. You don't remember.
That's a very small
feign ignorance. We need to back our way out of this
almost
lie.
Non-existent. By and large, the overwhelming majority of folks with incarcerated children are living really, I hate to say the word on the brink, or the phrase on the brink, but that's what it is, right? You're constantly, you know, the experience of having incarcerated children it siphons money from you. You are paying for their incarceration. You pay for every phone call. You pay for all of their basic necessities while they're incarcerated. You pay to keep your kid locked up. So again, going back to thinking about these contradictions, you don't want to, you know, give money to this system, but at the same time, you don't want your child suffering. And if any little thing that you can do lessens that suffering, you know, for example, this isn't in an essay, but it's, you know, sort of one of my famous tangents, that a few weeks ago, they had, I think it was either hoagies or they could get, sandwiches from like one of the local fast food places. Well, the prices that they charge incarcerated people are astronomical compared to what you would pay out on the street.
Say no, Bob, commit to the story.
There's no way I'm denying them that.
Don't give her the satisfaction.
Like they haven't had French fries from, whatever fast food chain or, is supplying them with that little bit of normalcy, right? So you pay double. And if you have multiple children in prison, you're paying for both of them. And sometimes you're paying for their friends as well, because their friends may not have, folks who have the financial resources to pay, for those things. So in a lot of ways, it just, it renders you in this, sense of powerlessness, right? And I don't write that, this is just kind of like a thing that you can just, give up on, right? Like I'm not suggesting that we're giving up on our kids or we're giving up on fighting this system. I'm writing from a place of rage, right? I'm writing from a place of deep anger and deep sadness about, the ways that we are forced to survive under this really brutal system.
Capitalism.
And I talk about, having, going to therapy. And having a therapist, ask me if I thought I had PTSD, and I said, what do you mean post? There is no post as far as I'm concerned, that this is active and ongoing and perpetual until, who knows when, right? There's no way for me to, I'm not looking at this in terms of this happened in the past. This is currently happening. And that therapist's advice to me at the time was, well, maybe you should stop doing, what you do. And I said, organizing, like advocating for my kids, like doing the work that actually keeps them alive, right? That actually keeps them going. You're suggesting that was the last, time I saw that therapist. And it took a long time before I would go back. And that, again, I write about this in a piece, reveals the gaps in mental health, in this country, right? That the way that therapists are trained leaves so much to be desired. We're not teaching them about these systems. And if we are, they're doing a workshop or they're taking an elective here and there, and they gravitate towards those things if that's something that, they want to focus on. But by and large, it's not something that is folded into the curriculum. I don't want to ask questions just to ask questions. I want to ask questions when we have them. So that they understand these structural, these systemic problems that are impacting so many people. And then they say, well, why aren't Black people coming to therapy? Or why are they suspicious? Well, because you don't know anything, right? You don't have anything to say to someone like me except to give me really bad advice. And then you wonder why I'm not coming back. Wow. Right? And, I share that.
Did you just say that Black people can't go to therapy?
Expressing the kind of vulnerability that, I feel is required for us to get through a lot of the muck, and to get us to think very differently and push us into a kind of liberatory space. I have to be willing to model that vulnerability, right? And I'm not expecting cookies or suggesting I deserve a pat on the back for doing that. I'm sharing that because there's like shame and stigma that is attached to having incarcerated loved ones, to having incarcerated children specifically, right? The unstated expectation is that we don't talk about them. Right? You don't talk about them at the family gathering. If you have those, you don't talk about those at the dinner table or at the party or anything like that. So you're supposed to kill off a part of yourself in order to be palatable and acceptable to people that claim to care about you and to love you. And, pardon my French, but fuck that. Right? And that's how I approach it. And I feel that, for parents who are wrestling and dealing with the pain, the pain of having incarcerated children, that we need spaces. We need a place where we can put that pain, where we can talk about those experiences without having to feel like, we have to apologize for what our kids did. There is not a single parent on the planet that has a child that is incarcerated, that caused harm, whatever, whether it's great or small harm, that is like, yay, I'm glad you harmed. That let's dispel with that kind of, myth and fiction around, that we're co-signing that sort of thing. We support our kids because we believe that we don't dispose of them. That's what we believe. We believe that you're not going to transform society if you just discard of people. That for people to want to transform, for people to want to take accountability, they have to be part of a community. If the community that they come from is throwing them away, where is the incentive, right? Where is the incentive for them to course correct? Where is the incentive for them to engage and to want to change and to want to transform and participate and do all of the things that we say we want to do? And I said, we have to do all of that stuff under these conditions. We have to figure out how to resolve conflict over telephone calls that may get, disrupted because someone's listening in and they don't like the way that the conversation is going. Or video visits that never happen because someone, decides to cancel the video visit 5 minutes before. And that expectation that you have as the person on the outside, as the parent, as the caregiver, of wanting to see your person, and the expectations that they have, the anticipation. And they're wondering because they're never told, right? They're never told why the visit was canceled. You have to wait until they make contact with you. And that could be a few hours. It could be a day. It could be longer, depending on, what
she's
the
talking
situation
about the
is.
impact of the
So
prison
that
industrial
leaves
complex on
people
parenting,
kind
which
of
is what
like floating,
abolition
and they're
is.
having to figure
Abolition
out
is a
and
reference to the prison
think about
industrial
and
complex
conjure up
almost
all
always.
sorts of things that may not be true. So we're dealing with that, right? So we're operating under those conditions, and that's why I emphasized, the point that Harsha brought up earlier around, the context under which we live, love, and labor under really do matter, right? That we cannot separate the material conditions from the context under which we're forced. And I want to emphasize, we're forced. This isn't a choice that we're making. Our choices are constrained by the material conditions that we're forced to live under. And I say some other stuff in the essay, but I can't remember it all. And if I go into the notes, it's going to be 3 more hours. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to my
lost my stitch
co-editor.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I think that is such an important contextualization for the whole book, because nobody's parenting in a vacuum. And I think that what we brought and why we wanted this to be an anthology was partly a recognition of that fact, and partly a recognition that everyone is operating within these systems as they parent, even if they're not aware of that. Like, that is,
capitalism impacts everyone,
are sometimes impacting parenting even more than those tiny little choices that we make throughout the day that are also so important. I'll say a few words about my essay on imagination. So one of the things that came up as we were brainstorming the scope of this book was that we're not simply offering insights as parents or from parents or insights about how to parent, although all that stuff is lessons from kids. And for my personal essay in the book, I wrote about what I was learning from my kid, who was a toddler at the time. And years ago, for Prison by Any Other Name, I interviewed Rachel Herzing, longtime amazing abolitionist organizer, and she spoke about
Yeah, I was
a
kind of
lack
thinking she
of
might be a troll. Like, wouldn't it
creativity
be funny if it was
as a
someone doing
primary
us?
stumbling block to
Wouldn't it be
moving
funny if it
beyond
was secretly a
prisons.
member of this
So
community and
we
we didn't
live
know?
in a police society. We live in a capitalist society, and
We live in
we're
a police
not
society, a capitalist
particularly
society.
encouraged
Boom.
to dream beyond those bounds. But young kids bring the wonder and the curiosity. And several authors in the book talk about this. Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn talk
Bill
about
Ayers.
children's questions, following children's questions, how they can push us forward. Kim, in your conclusion, you talk about following the kids, asking why, and encouraging ourselves to do that as well. So nowadays, and this is my tangent, my kid now is 6 years old, and every day over the past couple weeks, they have invented a new way to defeat the fascists. And my favorite example is when they drew a hippo unicorn who, and I'm sorry if this is really gross, I'm immune to it because I have a 6-year-old. This hippo unicorn got really constipated when Trump won the election. And the hippo unicorn just channeled all of the food it ate into growing a really long tail. And the tail has a superpower to sense whenever Donald Trump or other fascists are about to do something horrible. And when that's about to happen, the hippo unicorn does something very annoying and distracting that makes it impossible for the fascists to work. So they can't enact any of their horrible intentions. And so I brought you this extreme tangent because
These people are
I think
winning.
sometimes
They're
we
fucking
need
winning.
this kid stuff to break our imaginations open, to shake us up, and particularly in catastrophic moments.
They just gave us super poo tail.
When I wrote
as
my
a
personal
solution to
essay for the book,
fascism, and
my
they're
kid was
winning.
younger, and I describe how in the aftermath of my sister Keely's death, I felt like the door to my imagination just shut. It just like went off. And my sister was a mother and a writer and an advocate for incarcerated mothers. She had been an incarcerated mother herself. She was 29 when she died. She was 20 weeks pregnant. And she died of an overdose after being forced into a court-mandated abstinence-based program, which drastically lowered her drug tolerance. So it made it much more likely that she would overdose if she went back to using heroin. And she went back to using because she was addicted. And of course, she hid it because she didn't want to be rearrested. And no one called for help when she overdosed. Everyone there was, of course, scared to call 911 because the police would show up. So it took 11 days before Keely's body was found and identified.
So they'd rather she die than go to prison.
And right afterwards,
essentially.
Right after,
they'd rather she die than succumb to capitalism.
Happens, you have to plan the funeral. And we were in shock. I wanted to help plan a meaningful funeral, a funeral that was worthy of my sister. I wanted to write a worthy eulogy, but my imagination was shut down. But that night, as I describe in my essay, I listened as my toddler made up a song, and I heard them reaching for new notes, new words, like just spinning this thing together, making it up as they went along. And letting each note kind of lead into the next in this wild way that toddlers can do. And it unlocked something in me. And that moment made it possible for me to imagine. No funeral would be worthy of my sister because she should be alive. But the funeral that we created was something that I would say was born of imagination. We thought about what is a world in which Keely would not have died. And we tried to create that. We brought in harm reduction workers to discuss their work and distribute the life-saving overdose antidote, naloxone, distribute fentanyl test strips. In our eulogies, we emphasized the mandate to build a world without the cages and confines and policing that entrapped Keely. We brought in
They used her
liberatory
eulogy
music,
to rant
and
against
people
capitalism.
left the funeral with life-saving supplies to prevent death like Keely's.
They used her funeral to
So this
advocate
is just
for
one
socialism.
example of a role that my child has played with their wild imagination.
Bruh.
And it's so small, but it feels like a useful one to uplift. Because so often when we talk about parenting, even in a progressive way, it's about how we mold our kids and get them to follow our rules. And obviously, sometimes that's absolutely necessary. We would never get out of the house in the morning if my kid could just do whatever they wanted. But I think one thing our book does is also challenges people to take inspiration from the out of the boxness of our children, from their improvisations, and to let their insights inspire us sometimes in our broader work. So we've got some questions, I think, to attempt to tackle.
Awesome. Q&A. She's crying.
And
well, she
maybe
talked about the death of her
this
sister,
first
I
one,
guess, but
thank you, Sean, for sharing these questions with us. How did you know when you were ready to become a parent?
that's not
Whatever
a
readiness
question.
means to you. Sufficiently healed, prepared,
Someone actually asked that?
etc. So I don't know if someone wants to pick that
That
up.
seems like a planted question to me. That doesn't seem real. When did you know you were ready to become a parent?
I defer to my esteemed comrades on the panel.
They're all like, I'm not.
Well, I'm just jumping in because no one else has. Not that I have the answer. That's such an interesting question. Because I don't remember ever thinking, am I ready now to be a parent? I have 4 children, and each one, the first 3 were born every other year. And then I had a 14-year gap before the 4th was born, which was a complete surprise. I thought I was too old to have children at that point. And so I don't know that I was ready. That's the thing. Maybe someone else had a more deliberate plan. I didn't have so much of a plan to have children. I could have. So now that I think about, I could have terminated those pregnancies or any of them. So in a way, because that was a possibility, that means that I must have thought I was ready to have them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have. And maybe I'm taking up too much time because I'm thinking this through as I'm answering. So what was it in my life that made me think it's all right for me to have children? Because there are definitely times in my life when I took steps not to have children. That I was more deliberate. And I think it just had to do, but part of it was, can I possibly find time? Can I possibly find time to raise children? Um, uh, I wanted to have, for me, it was important to have a partner who would help me raise the children. So, for example, when I was a student, if I thought that the morning after pill was super important as a student, I knew then I didn't want to have children. I had children when I was already out of school and working, and I was married at the time, so I had a partner who I could pretty much depend on. Um, so those were some of the things that I think made me feel I was ready. I also, for the first three, my parents were fairly close by. They were about 2 hours drive away. And I was so blessed to be able to bring three kids to drop off. Where can you drop off three kids at someone's doorstep? So that's just really off the top of my head. I think, I'll just conclude by saying I was very blessed with all four children to have the resources and support I needed. And as I mentioned earlier, my greatest passion in my work now is to abolish a system that punishes people for not having the support they need. And they don't have the support they need because of the gross inequities and inhumanities of our nation. And this is true globally as well. And so part of my passion for abolishing family policing is the blessings I had in having the resources I needed and support I needed.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And thank you for sharing all of that context. I really appreciate it. Well, it makes me think of Beth Ritchie's foreword to our book, where she talks about the arrival of the responsibility of parenting as a wave that just kind of hits you and knocks you down. And she said that that's true, and I agree, regardless of whether you've planned or prepared or whether you've made some sort of formal arrangements, that no matter what, the practice, and now I'm quoting, the practice of parenting seems more like a wave crashing against the shore. Like a wave, the awareness of the huge responsibility associated with caring for children arrives suddenly and sometimes causes us to lose our balance. As parents and caregivers, we get tossed around a lot, sometimes feeling like we are drowning. Other times we emerge from the interactions with young people feeling rejuvenated and refreshed. Like when a wave washes over a million tiny grains of sand, a constant shifting, a reorganization of a million details characterizes active parenting. And she says abolition is like this too. You're like going along and then you get hit with the wave of something immediate that needs to be done. And so I think, yeah, maybe the answer is we're never ready, and and also all these other things. Kim, do you want to share the next question? There's a few here.
There are quite a few questions here. There's one here that, and we're not going in any particular order, but this one stands out from Ashley. Thanks, Ashley, for your question. Ashley asks, as abolitionist parent, as an abolitionist parent with kids in public school, in public school, the discipline strategies are
over a whole bunch of other
misaligned.
questions.
How do we parent in a way that honors
Not
our values
cool.
but prepares the kids for public
Not
school?
okay. Can someone ask again? Can you guys explain what it means to queer the family?
Any takers?
I don't want to hog the microphone, but
no, I want to hear because I'm thinking about it
so,
right now.
My children went to public school. There was one point where I had to pull my son out of public school and find an alternative for him.
Listen, if there's a Haymarket Spy here, it is a legitimate question about what you guys mean when you say queer the nuclear family. We're not being rude, we're not being disruptive, but we have questions, and it's not cool to skip over all of them. We're amplifying your presentation. That's not cool. We're being polite.
For me, it was my Black sons who were in public school, where there was just so much hostility and low expectations for them. But the expectation, one time we were called in and the assistant principal
We're going to shame you guys into oblivion if you don't answer this fucking question.
Around the school,
we're going to be like, they don't even know what it means to queer the nuclear family. They're writing whole books about it. They're talking about it in presentations. They can't even explain what that means.
On my very tall Black son. And I'm like, well, what does that have to do with my caring for my son? Your worry about drug dealers on the corner in a punitive way. It wasn't to care for him. It was that, how do we know he's not one of them kind of thing, and we just pulled him out of the school because it was obvious that there was no way he could learn in an environment. Now everybody does, again, everyone doesn't have that option to do that. But
everyone's asking the same
organizing,
you guys
fighting,
are blowing our
cover.
From
other parents is,
that's what's pissing
I think
them
important.
off.
I echo that. Absolutely, 100%. And with my oldest son, it was a very similar situation. They were all in public school, and they attended private school earlier and Catholic school and whatever I could, get scholarships and cobble money together for and all of the things. But, as you point out, it's a privilege to be able to, opt out of that system. And I remember it was 9th grade, and my son was just like, he was fed up with everything that was happening. That was the height of No Child Left Behind, and everyone, all the teachers were like enthralled with No Child Left Behind, and schools, administrators, everyone. And he had to take a test-taking skills class, right? And he came home and he was furious. And he, again, has a mom that's an educator. And so the conversations at home are very different than what he's experiencing in school. And, he would get written up, he'd get suspended for finishing tasks early and just kind of fidgeting and doodling and doing the thing that you do to fill up time because you're giving the kids this work that means absolutely nothing, right? And I pulled him out of school, and I was not a well-resourced parent at the time. I was single parent, and I was single parenting pretty much my entire life and their lives as well. And I was in school, I was in grad school at the time, and I was working part-time.
I mean, the
working
CPS
several
stuff
jobs
is actually legit if we're honest about it. Child
and
Protective
I was like,
Services is bullshit.
we're going to homeschool you, right? And the school fought back.
Child Protective Services,
right? The school fought back. They're like, you don't have a right to homeschool. And at the time, I was living in a state that has very high regulations for, homeschooling. So that's something to be aware of as well. But I had a master's in education.
Screwed up my knitting.
I was like, slow your roll there. I got this. And pulled him out. And for a year, he basically tagged along with me, and, we came up with all kinds of projects. And, I put together a curriculum that satisfied the requirements, but also met his needs, right, for the things that he wanted. And, that's something that only recently I was sharing this experience with someone who is confronting a very similar situation of having to pull out their child from the school over some really serious things that are happening with them. And, I'm like, you can do this. You got this. And this is not, unlike when I was doing it, I had to figure it out by myself. I'm like, you know me, and I know so many people, and I will implicate everyone that I know in this project of making sure that they show up for this child. Everyone I know that has a syllabus, that has ever taught a class, that taught a workshop, does political education,
man.
they're in,
another 6
and
marker.
we got you, and we're not going to let her fall through the cracks. And that's what's required, right? That, we have to think about it, as you said, Dorothy, that we've got our kids. We've got our kids, and we're going to fight like hell against, as Dylan put it, and I feel, loose enough to use the profanity that Dylan used during the thing. He's like, we got you against those fuckers, right? That we got your back against them. And that's the attitude that you have to have. That may not necessarily be helpful advice or answer the question that was being asked, but I think that attitude, that mentality is that the schools don't get to have the final say. Get involved. There's an essay by Anya Tanya-Vudi that I highly recommend. And Anya, I interviewed Anya for the podcast, for the series that coincides with the book called Lessons in the Garden, or Lessons from the Garden. And she talks about, how she ran for school board. Right now, again, you may not have the resources to run for school board. That may not be a thing that you can possibly do. But if you approach this thing as this is a me thing and an us thing, right? That we're all going to try to figure this out and find your people and bug them until you get the right answer, until you get the thing resolved, until you get those needs addressed. If we all took that kind of approach, things would be radically different. These schools are not intended for our kids. They're not designed to care for our kids' hearts, for their souls, for their minds. And we can do better. And I feel like it's our job as parents and caregivers. And I would argue educators. Educators need to step up, and it's hard. And I know it's hard. Professionally, I know it's difficult under capitalism. You got to have got to keep your job and all that stuff. But then at the same time, it's like,
educators can't step up under capitalism.
Effects.
Thank you. I think that was a really powerful answer to that question.
Yeah, it was very powerful. Move on.
Challenging the legitimacy.
What does it mean to queer the family
structures that are being raised? So unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time, which is sad, because I was already thinking of answers to some of these questions.
No,
that
you
are
weren't.
Also good.
You're a liar.
Good news is
you're a liar.
They're in the book, so you should definitely buy it.
Liar.
If you buy it from the Haymarket website. This month, they'll actually send a copy of the book, an additional copy, to someone in prison. So buy it through Haymarket. And there's also, at the back of the book, there are discussion questions. So if you want to start a book group, if you have a book group, there are a bunch of questions there that
we're not starting a book club for your book.
Started in your conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate this hour and a half on a weeknight. And Kim and Dorothy and Harsha, you're all so amazing. Our interpreters, our captioners, really appreciate all of you. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you, everyone.
Hang on.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Hang on.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, I guess we're out. Hey, no one got banned in the chat, so that was good. That was a banner night of no one getting banned in the chat. Listen, I mean, the presentation was kind of a little bit dull, to be honest. We did get some good zingers in. I think the most... Oh, hang on. They just started playing really loud music. I think that the funniest thing was actually talking to that queer educator in the chat, and it really did. I think that we need to pursue this idea, because even just getting the screenshots of you guys talking with that queer educator in the chat, that was probably the funniest effing thing that happened that entire stream. And I really think we should just, you know what? Everything happens for a reason. God winks at us. We are sent signs. And I feel as though that queer educator tonight in the chat was there for a reason. Suzanne, we have already answered this. It wasn't about parental abolition. It was about parenting for abolition. Abolition has to do with the prison industrial complex, which is a reference to capitalism. No one said parental abolition. I know it gets confusing, so I know it gets confusing. I'm not trying to be mean or anything. Anyway, the universe has sent us a sign that we need to start a project, as though we need another project. But I'm putting together a list of some of the projects people can work on, and I think this should be one, okay? We should start a project where we find queer therapists or queer educators or queer teacher trainers or queer diversity trainers or queer anything, but the really die-hard true believers. Like, these people are going to look weird. They're going to have piercings. They're going to have tattoos. They're going to have weird hair. They're probably going to be fat. They're going to be non-binary. We need to find the real deal true believers. Yeah, we were looking up queer therapists for a while. We already have a little bit of a head start. And we need to start engaging in undercover conversations with those queer people about just whatever they do. Can you help do therapy with my non-binary child? What would that involve? How do you think about non-binary children? What causes, engaging in them in an actual question, and get some back and forth going. And then we take those messages and we publish them and we laugh at them because it's going to be funny. And I think this is a really good project. One in the chat if you want to pursue this project. Let me know. One in the chat if you think this is a good idea. Two in the chat if you think it's a bad idea. Tolkien fan, thank you for the $10 super chat, getting to our goal. And Maria has put us over the top. They say you only have X followers or likes or whatever, but they obviously put someone in here as a spy. That's true. Haymarket Books, we thought that was very cowardly of you. Very, very cowardly indeed. You know, we weren't being rude. We were being nice. I thought we were asking relevant questions. All right. Everyone seems to think this is a good idea. So this idea is a go. We're going to have to make a list of queer professionals. Now, I want to encourage people, if you want to do your own research on this, utilize ChatGPT. Utilize AI. Let's come up with a massive fucking document of queer, true believing mental health professionals or educational professionals or training professionals or whatever. Let's come up with a big fuck off document using AI to hunt these people down figuratively to email with them, not literally. We're not gonna physically even go near them, YouTube, okay? I'm not saying hunt them down in real life. I'm saying find their email address. And then we engage in conversation with them and we get them to say the quiet part out loud, and it'll be great. And we can probably find other training videos when we're doing this. This is, guys, mark my words, Ba and I have gone down this road before. You go down this road and you find yourself in a treasure trove of content of the craziest shit in the world. I don't know why we didn't think of this sooner. I really don't know. Why the fuck didn't we think of this sooner? We've been dying to get back into queer. Queer is the best. It's the best, worst place on the internet. It is the best, worst place on the internet. So this is something that's going to happen. I like this idea. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for tonight. As always, do make sure you head over to my Substack, which I will show you on the screen here in a moment. Sign up for Sign up for my email over on Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. You can sign up for free for email updates. You can also support the work I'm doing at $8 a month, $80 a year. I've actually just created this specific article giving you lots of things you can do to support my work, whether you want to give me money or not. You can become a paid member. You can give gift subscriptions. You can donate subscriptions. You can make a one-time gift. You can shop in my merchandise store. You can fund my next book. My next book. You can join me for daily live streams. You can sign up on my other Substack, thecult.substack.com, to get email updates about when I'm going to be live streaming, what I'm going to be live streaming. You can subscribe to my other channels. Of course, none of this costs money. You can follow me on Twitter, help amplify my content on there. DM me if you want to get to be a part of my private DM group where we're talking about amplifying content, who we're going to reply to, generally conspiring against James Lindsay and doing all that stuff to drive him absolutely insane. If you want to be part of my private DM group on Twitter, just send me a DM. Explain who you are and how you know of my work, and you know, give me your bona fides and stuff, and I will add you to my private group, and we will engage in nonsense and shenanigans on the internet. You can join my Telegram channel, and most importantly, above all, share my work. Share my work with your friends, share my work with your family, invite people to the streams, get other people involved. The more people we have involved, the more people who are going to learn what's really going on. And of course, as a reminder, guys, I am 100% funded by you. I can't do this without you, and I really appreciate it. All right, I will be back tomorrow at 5 p.m., and I'm going to go do some digging for some queer people. It's time to get queer. It's time to engage. It's the holidays. It's the end of the year. Can you guys believe it's the end of the year? Like, for reals, though, what happened? It's almost December. I have to cook Thanksgiving. Whatever. I'll be back tomorrow, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your night. We'll see you soon.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.